Hi, and thanks for joining us on Your Home, Your Vote Campaign 2011. This has certainly been an interesting week in a campaign many felt wouldn't be interesting. And with just 4 days left, voters are now trying to figure out who they'll be backing come Election Day. Now, on tonight's show, we'll look back at the overall campaign, how the leaders did, who impressed, who fell flat, and who's riding the momentum. We'll also check back in with our expert to see how the latest polls could unfold in terms of seats in the next parliament. And we're also taking a look at the impact of social media on the campaign. But without doubt, the big news this week is the rising fortunes of the New Democrats. At dissolution, they were the fourth party, but a strong performance in Quebec this time around has the NDP sitting second in several polls. Take a look at this ecosipolitics.ca poll coming out earlier this week. It breaks down like this. The survey of more than 3,000 Canadians puts the Conservatives in front at 33.7% support. The New Democrats are back a little more than 5 points at 28%. The Liberals in third, sitting at 23.7% among decided voters. Now, if that was the only poll showing the New Democrats in second, it could be discounted. But late Tuesday, a new poll from Angus Reid had similar findings. It puts the Tories at 35%, almost 3% less than their 2008 election result. And again, in this poll, the NDP sits at 30%. This poll, once again, bad news for Liberal supporters as it puts the party 8 back of second and double digits behind the Conservatives. Now, we'll have more on what the poll numbers could mean in terms of seats later in the show, but there are some encouraging signs about voter turnout in this election. Elections Canada announcing Tuesday that Canadians turned out in record numbers to cast their ballots over the Easter long weekend. In fact, the number of voters at advanced polls was 34.5% higher than in 2008. That's almost 500,000 more voters than last time out. And one thing certain, Liberal leader Michael Ignatieff is hoping many of those voters are Liberals, because in the last election, an estimated 500,000 to 1 million traditional Liberal supporters stayed home, and his poll numbers right now suggest he'll need every vote he can get. But while analysts say the campaign is scrambling, on Tuesday, Ignatieff said he's confident he's attracted more people to vote Liberal this year. The man who's clearly benefiting from the Liberal slide in the polls is this man, Jack Layton, and it's clear he has a spring in his step as the campaign closes. He held an interactive town hall in Toronto Tuesday night, taking questions from the audience about the party platform. Stephen Harper and the Conservatives also held the rally broadcast live across the country Tuesday, and in it, Harper encouraged his party faithful to keep their support up so the Conservatives can stay in control in the next parliament. Now, what the next parliament will look like is pretty cloudy tonight, and this campaign, which got off to a kind of sleepy start, has certainly finished with a flurry. I sat down with political scientist Henry Jasek this week to go through the campaign to this point. So we're in the last week of the campaign. Henry, thanks for your time. I know you're going to be here with us on May 2nd giving your analysis, but I wanted to get your take for this last episode of the show about what your thoughts are on the campaign right now, specifically this surge in NDP momentum. We've seen some wild seat predictions, anywhere from a high of 100 to certainly dozens more perhaps than they've had before. What's your take on this late ride?
Well, of course, I think this is a surprise to most people, although some top pollsters told me privately in the beginning of the campaign that there was a chance for the NDP to get more seats than the Liberals, but they didn't want to go public because people would have not believed them. But in fact, that, Jack Layton is for real. People have moved to him. And I think the basic reason that has happened here is that 4 of the 5 leaders are very cranky and tired and are complaining about things. Jack Layton is happy, upbeat. I mean, he has his platform. He believes in it. He's energetic. And people are just gravitating to him because he's the happy guy.
When you talk about happy, it's also interesting that picks up on the theme almost of the ads we're seeing right now. Jack Layton put out a really positive ad last week, but the ads we're now seeing from the Liberals and from the Conservatives are very much negative, and they're all attacking each other. There's a contrast there as well, isn't there?
We know, yes, indeed, because we do know that Canadians sometimes do respond mildly to attack ads, but we're not like Americans. Americans really do eat up attack ads, and some of the attack ads in the United States are very vicious by our standards, and Americans are willing to tolerate that. Canadians really don't like that, and I know it's a cliche, we say Canadians are polite people, but in fact we don't like those major attack ads. And then you add to the fact that when the Liberals and Conservatives are attacking each other, there's a likelihood of people saying, well, a pox on both their houses, I'll vote for somebody who's not engaging in this, and I think that's also playing into Layton's hands.
So let's talk about the general. We've seen them on the campaign trail now for 4 or 5 weeks. Let's start with let's start with the Harper campaign. What's your take about how that campaign has gone?
Well, the Harper campaign, I think, it was the best in the beginning. They had geared themselves up for the election. They had run a lot of ads before the election campaign. They had a plan, and the plan was to get a majority. They probably had a bare majority at the beginning of the election, but as things have gone along, they weren't able to build on that, and they got frustrated. I think Stephen Harper, by the time of the debate, got frustrated, and he started showing his irritation. And we know from the past that when Harper shows his irritation, he loses votes.
All right, let's talk then about Michael Ignatieff. He apparently had a stunning start to the campaign, it would seem.
Well, he was doing pretty well, actually with some help from the Prime Minister, Harper, who said, let's do one-on-one. And of course, what happened at that point, we saw some polls where Ignatieff started going up because they drifted away from all the other parties. But Harper stopped that right away because he didn't want to boost up the Liberal leader. But Ignatieff, the problem with Ignatieff, he has no experience. First time as a leader, it is very difficult to run a national campaign as a leader for the first time, or even province-wide, as we saw in the last provincial election. So he doesn't have that experience. He's never sat in cabinet. So he has very limited experience, and so he's just not reacting very well. He doesn't have his hands, and feel on the pulse of the population, and I think it really shows.
And he's worked hard at trying to do that too, hasn't he?
Well, he has tried hard to do that, but politics is a game, a profession where experience counts. There are no child prodigies in politics. You have to learn this, and running as a leader more than once, you learn a lot, and I think that's why Jack Layton is doing so well. Michael Ignatieff is not doing well.
So let's talk about the NDP campaign, because it was interesting at the beginning. People were concerned about Jack Layton's health. Could he manage the campaign, etc.? But he seems to have been gaining strength not only in numbers, but also physically as well.
That's right. I think what he planned the campaign is it would be light set of meetings in the beginning with an idea that he would peak at the election campaign. So in the beginning, people say he didn't look well, he's not having many meetings, it's not all that energetic. But what he was doing was saving his energy for the sprint. So he recognized that the election campaign is a marathon. You have to have something in the tank in those last few miles, that last week of the campaign, or the last 2 weeks. And since the debates, he has really taken off. And he's had some very energetic meetings, some smart scheduling too, I think. I can remember a couple of Saturdays in the middle of the day, he had Atlantic Coast rallies that were played across the country on the weekend. And of course, a good rally in Atlantic Canada is really enthusiastic, whether it's in Halifax, where one was, and then later in St. John's, Newfoundland. And those, he really looked like he was having a great time. And because the audience was having a great time, because maritime audiences, Atlantic audiences are very enthusiastic. Smart scheduling on his part. Right.
It's going to be interesting. People probably look back at his campaign. If those numbers, of course, pan out, the poll numbers pan out at the actual polls, of course, that's the other big question, isn't it? I mean, the NDPs very often poll high, but then don't finish so high in the polls, right?
That's right. Well, a lot of people have to convert their liking of Jack Layton to an actual vote for Jack Layton and the NDP, and that's what we have to watch for. Will that happen?
So let's talk about May 2nd comes around. It seems, it seems relatively clear right now that it's going to be another conservative minority government. Are we really going to know what our government's going to look like on May 2nd, or isn't it going to be this sort of other potential now of this combination of other parties beyond May 2nd, perhaps running the country? Do you know what I'm getting at?
Absolutely, because if it's a majority of Conservatives, we have a government. If it's anything else, I think everything's on the table, especially if the NDP is finished with a very high number. We could see Jack Layton as Prime Minister, as he's asked the Canadian people, make me Prime Minister.
And people used to sort of mock him when he would start his speech saying, I'm running to be Prime Minister of the country. How funny now that he stuck to it, right? That's the other thing you got to say about him. He stuck to it every single time. He hasn't played himself as a third-party candidate ever.
He had a plan, he kept to it, he thought people would respond to his plan, and so far it looks like he's right.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting. What are you going to watch for then over the last few days of the campaign?
Well, I want to see those NDP numbers keep going up. They have been going up for almost 2 weeks. I want to see those numbers continue to climb and not fall back in the last few days.
What do you expect to see then from the Conservatives and Liberals at the same time?
I think they're probably pretty confused. It's very hard for them to switch their gears to attack the NDP. For so long they were attacking each other, and trying to see that the other side is a major adversary. Psychologically, it is very hard for them to say, I have to switch gears, turn around completely, and face the guy who's behind me. Yeah, it's very, very hard to do psychologically at this point in the campaign.
All right, Henry, thanks for your time, and we'll look forward to your insight again on May 2nd.
It's going to be a fun day on May 2nd, I think, a very interesting day.
Up next, in the late stages of the campaign, we take a look at some of the TV ads the parties are hoping will sway your vote, and at what the seat breakdown could be. Well, new TV ads have been released in the run-up to the campaign, and the New Democrats appear to be focusing on the positive. Their latest ad out Tuesday is asking voters to imagine a Layton-led Canada.
Imagine choosing a leader
who actually cares.
Now, the ad features clips of Canadians at home and at work and in their communities, and just like last week's new ad, it ends with a rallying cry from Jack Layton at a recent town hall meeting. The party also says their current campaign features the largest ad buy ever for the New Democrats. And that positive sentiment echoes what Henry Jasek said earlier about Jack Layton being the happy guy on the campaign. And the New Democrats went for another positive message on another recent spot.
I tell you that you have no choice but to vote for more of the same.
In an ad called Choice, the party's trying to convince Canadians they don't have to vote for either the Conservatives or Liberals come election day. The party wants voters to feel comfortable when they go to mark their ballot and not make a change for traditional parties at the last second. And with Jack Layton becoming the main threat to their majority dreams, the Conservatives quickly reissued an attack ad targeting the New Democrats this week.
Ambition can be blind. Just ask the NDP's Jack Layton.
The ad is called Blind Ambition and talks about Layton's part in the so-called coalition with the Liberals and Bloc in 2008. But the New Democrats say the ad was full of falsehoods and was basically inaccurate. Now, for their part, the Liberals had to put out an ad attacking their opponents on either flank.
Harper and Layton, two career politicians, two sides of the same coin.
So they released a spot called Coin, which the party compared the Harper record to the Layton record, saying they're basically career politicians, like two sides of the same coin. Of course, the ads are trying to sway voter opinion, but as the poll numbers change, well, what does that mean to the seat projections? Again, this week, I spoke to Barry Kay from Wilfrid Laurier University about how he sees things playing out. Barry, thanks for your time again. I understand you've put out some new seat projection numbers, and they show significant changes from the last time we spoke. Can you break them down for us?
Yeah, I mean, the main difference, of course, is the NDP in Quebec. The NDP, again, in the last federal election, had got 12% of the vote in the province of Quebec. The numbers, by combining several polls, including those by Ecos and Angus Reid and Nanos, they're now at 38%. That means their vote has more than tripled since the last election. And that gets converted into a much more significant number of seats than one could have ever imagined. I would have asked for a sobriety test of anybody who had suggested these kinds of things even a week ago.
So now you were projecting, Barry, with your analysis of all these national polls, looking at the regional numbers, that the New Democrats could be in second place, correct?
At the moment, actually, we have them in second. I would have said could be a few days ago. Now, in fact, they're actually there. It's not just the rise of the NDP in Quebec, although that's a lot of it. It's also the fact that the NDP is rising in other parts of the country. We now have them slated to pick up seats in Nova Scotia, in Ontario, in British Columbia, and other provinces where they hadn't won them in the past. A seat like Kamloops, for example, we have just the most recent projection, we've pushed Kamloops now into the NDP territory. Seats in Dartmouth, the South Shore, St. Margaret's of Nova Scotia, that's a seat that the NDP has never won before, and this isn't Quebec, so it isn't just in Quebec.
How surprised are you at this, Barry?
Well, compared to when? Compared to 2 weeks ago, I'm stunned. Compared to yesterday, I'm not so stunned because we have seen this wave rolling along. That, in fact, it was surprising a couple of weeks ago, and then it got bigger, and then it got bigger, and it's still getting bigger, and frankly, in a couple of days, it may be bigger than it is now.
Do you think, Barry, that there's any sign, sorry to interrupt, that this parliament, this election will end up in anything but a minority government situation now?
Oh, yeah, that is possible because most of the seats the NDP are picking up are not from the Conservatives. Most of the Quebec seats are coming from the Bloc, although there are a couple of seats that the Conservatives are competitive in dealing with these as well. No, the question about majority or minority is not going to really be decided in Quebec because there weren't that many Conservative seats to begin with.
Right.
The question of majority is going to be decided in Ontario, in places like Kitchener-Waterloo, and in London, perhaps less so in Hamilton, where it's the NDP is contesting with the Liberals. But there are a number of other ridings, and perhaps most especially of all in the 905 around Toronto, areas like Brampton, Mississauga, the Ajax Pickering seat. That's where the determination of a majority or a minority is going to be set. Right now, we have the Conservatives a little bit under. We've got them at 147, whereas 155 would be a majority. But no, people shouldn't think that this election has been decided at all. I think there's going to be a great deal of suspense on election night.
Barry, thanks for your time again.
You're quite welcome.
Next, pushing the political message 140 characters at a time, a look at the impact of Twitter and social media on the campaign. While there's no doubt social media has played a significant role in the 2011 campaign, all of the main party leaders have Twitter and Facebook accounts. Whether or not they're responsible for all the content is debatable, but what isn't up for debate is the impact of social media. This week I spoke to a McMaster University communications professor about what it means for this campaign and the future. Alex, thanks for your time today. I think it's safe to say this social media has played an incredibly large role in this campaign. What would you say to that?
Well, this is Canada's first federal social media election. It's the first time that Canadians have had the chance to use Twitter and Facebook and other social media technologies to have a giant tweet up, a giant conversation about politics and about the issues. And where it's happening in big ways is actually on a local level. Canadians are having conversations with one another, journalists are having conversations with one another, and Canadians are listening to those journalists' conversations. Some candidates are having an impact and tweeting and Facebooking and engaging the populations that they're trying to get to vote for them. But the question is, how much engagement is there? How much of a connection is there?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to wonder that, right? Because, I mean, they're out campaigning themselves. They can't speak to everybody. So does Twitter and Facebook kind of give them an extra edge on trying to connect more with voters rather than the traditional handshake, waving, handing out paraphernalia?
Absolutely. You know, from my perspective, what we've seen is we used to have abstract brands. You know, it was Pepsi versus Coke, politicians. You know, you'd have one politician who's a disconnected person from you, a leader who's a disconnected person, an abstract guy, somebody living in Ottawa, a woman or a man. But now what you have is somebody who's real. That person has been brought into your living room. Just as you go to Tim Hortons or you go to Starbucks or you go to Fortino's or whatever to have a conversation with your friends, and you see people in the distance, you get involved with them. At first you're a little hesitant, then they say, okay, no, it's we like your opinions, and then you get into it, and before you know it, you have a rip-roaring conversation with these people. They're your new friends, you're having a political impact on their lives. People are feeling that with their local candidates through social media. So
would you say then that the candidates are using Twitter effectively? Because there's some sense that some candidates are just sort of blurting out things, but then not doing the sort of interaction and the follow-up.
Absolutely. You know, people who dump key messages or canned political opinions or party line on Twitter, for example, or social media get ignored or actually become the object of ridicule. One of the things, if you follow ELXN41, Election 41, the hashtag on Twitter, is you see that there's this sarcasm, this satire, which is the kind of humor you'd expect if you were to go to the corner cafe or the pub, the kind of thing we're used to hearing, but we're not used to hearing it applied directly to local candidates. So the people that are failing at social media are failing and being mocked. The people that are succeeding are engaging publics.
So they're getting the hashtag fail?
Yes, they are.
Right. Okay. Moving on, though. Are there enough people, though, on Twitter to make an impact? And when I say that, is it just a few people that are on there sort of back and forth on the ELXN41 hashtag, or is it, can you tell that it's a really large and diverse audience enough to make that impact?
That's a good question. I mean, I've seen studies by various research agencies that rate the percentage of participating voters, people that have indicated an intention to vote, and participating in social media being at about 25%, which that's a quarter of the electorate. That's significant.
Mm-hmm. That is, yeah.
And it's a very interesting demographic split because quite often the people that are using social media belong to interesting demographic slices. You have people that are under 35 and also people that are 55 plus. Social media is incredibly popular among people 55 plus, particularly women.
Now, the 55 plus, generally speaking, are voters, but it's the under 35s who, generally speaking, are not the voters. So this could perhaps connect that under 35 generation to maybe boost the vote and get more people out potentially then.
Absolutely. And we're seeing it in terms of debate turnout. For example, I'll give you an example, McMaster. all right? We had a watch the national debates, kind of pub night type of activity at 1280, which is the McMaster's pub, undergraduate pub. And because of the Twitter and because of the Twitter activity and the initiative by the MSU, the McMaster Students Union, we had a really healthy turnout to that night. So we had a night of nerdy political fun watching the debate.
But everyone was debating in real time, and they didn't necessarily have to be at the pub, right?
That's the thing. Yeah. And in fact, what was interesting is that most people had Twitter lined up on a MacBook or a PC beside them. And so they're watching the debate, talking to their friends over a pint, and tweeting and following the outside world's perception of what's going on Twitter. You know, and a second example of that is the actual all-candidates debate being held at McMaster. As you know, or may or may not know, McMaster Student Union has done a real effort to get the vote out. There was a flash mob that they did, which was very successful, the day that both Stephen Harper and Michael Ignatieff had their showdown in Steeltown. And what they did, though, for the debate was they tweeted through their I'm a Vote 2011 and their Get the Vote Out campaign about this debate. They had twice the number of people they expected to turn out, plus overflow. It was incredible.
That's incredible, and that's really the power of social media and Facebook, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, you talk about that turnout rate. Do you hope that perhaps there may be an equivalent or an improved turnout perhaps at the polls, and will you be watching for that after May 2nd when we find out the actual numbers?
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next. People turned out to the debate, but to be frank, they were disappointed. Because the conversation they've been having with one another, with journalists who've been doing a great job of using Twitter and Facebook to connect with the population, sound them out, get their sentiment, get their feeling, talk to other journalists, get the message out, that depth of conversation, that personal feeling didn't come through. And it didn't come through the leaders' debate, didn't come through the local debate. So going to be very interesting to see how people actually translate that warm and fuzzy feeling they're getting from social media, turning out to events and then being disappointed.
That's really interesting. That's the ultimate connection, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Just want to get you quickly, Alex, on one last question. Elections Canada has basically said that they're going to be enforcing a rule which says you can't post any results on Twitter, Facebook, any kind of social media site over the course of the May 2nd campaign until all the polls are closed in Canada. Is this an outdated kind of law now that they're trying to enforce, and it's almost going to be impossible to enforce?
The spirit of the law is noble. It's the idea that the vote of a British Columbian should count just as much as the vote of someone from Central or Eastern Ontario, Central Canada or Eastern Canada. Fair enough. But the technology of the internet makes it almost impossible to police. What with anonymity, with the potential of assumed identities. The fact is, you and I could just sign up for any Twitter account we like, under any name. We could be anywhere. We could be in Bangladesh for all we know, you know. And be tweeting makes it almost impossible to enforce. So it's a noble idea. It's an idea that aims to equalize and include, but it may be an unenforceably noble idea.
We'll see how they adjust things perhaps going forward. Alex, thanks for your time. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And coming up, a preview of our coverage for election night. While the votes are being counted, we'll have what you need to know. Well, that is this edition of Your Home, Your Vote Campaign 2011. Thanks for watching. Before we go, though, I want to make sure you tune in to CHCH on Monday for complete coverage of the election results. We're going to have reporters at the main party leader headquarters, as well as have all of the local races and ridings covered, plus a panel of experts ready to give their instant feedback on what the results of the election mean, and of course, where our politics is going. That's going to start Monday at 9 p.m. Right now, you can stay tuned for the evening news at 11. Thanks for watching.